Welcome to Safe Church's Act to Keep Children Safe training. Hi, I'm Christine Yount-Jones, Executive Editor of Children's Ministry Magazine. We at Group Publishing, in partnership with Guide One Insurance, have created this program for children's ministry volunteers. This information will help you and your church reduce the risk of sexual abuse. Sadly, almost 90,000 children in the U.S. are the victims of sexual abuse each year. That's why it's so important for you to get risk-reducing training like this. So thanks for taking time to learn about keeping the kids at your church safe. It's vital that you serve in a ministry that protects children. To help us with this difficult subject, we've invited Dave Thornton. Dave serves as the director of Safe Church and has been a leader in children's ministry for decades. Thanks for lending your expertise to this important project, Dave.
You're welcome, Chris. I'm glad to share helpful safety ideas for children's ministry volunteers. My heart breaks every time I hear a story of a child that's been abused as a result of a relationship that developed at church. Let's talk about how you as a children's ministry volunteer can take action to protect children from child abuse.
When I was growing up in church, we never heard about sexual abuse. Are we overreacting to an uncommon problem?
No, the problem is real, Chris, and it happens more often than we'd like to think. Sexual abuse happens at about the same rate in all types of churches, large or small. Guide One Insurance estimates that 1 in 100 churches will face a sexual abuse incident each year. Most cases involving adults molesting children, but children and youth can abuse too. We must do our best as churches to prevent both risks.
That's right. The Bible is clear about our duty to protect children. In Matthew 19, Jesus says to let the little children come to me and do not hinder them. Putting children into a risky situation is hindering them in a terrible way.
That's so true. Children who've been abused in a church setting often have a hard time maintaining their faith. Can you imagine how difficult it would be for a child to trust God and believe in His goodness after being molested by a person in authority at church? Child sexual abuse can steal a childhood and can cause a lifetime of spiritual crises.
The most important reason to protect children is to honor the Lord by taking care of the kids He loves so much. Loving children means going to great lengths to protect them. Besides being harmful to the immediate victim, I've heard about court cases where abuse is destructive to entire churches too.
That's true, Chris, and the destruction isn't limited to financial damage. Emotional trauma to families and leaders, congregational disputes, shattered trust in leaders in the church, embarrassing media coverage, complicated court cases. It's a tragedy for the victimized child that can rip apart a church.
Sexual abuse is so evil. It's just not what churches are about. The whole subject is so depressing that most of us would rather not think about it.
That's right. But churches tend to avoid difficult subjects like sexual abuse and instead focus all our energy on ministry to children. There are proven practices that reduce the risk of abuse, practices that make ministry to children better as well as safer. Safety requires all of us to be informed about the problem and courageous enough to take action when needed.
Courageous how?
We can't let our fear of confronting a difficult subject like child abuse keep us from protecting children. Courageous ministry leaders make the extra effort to keep kids safe.
We want to equip you to be courageous, and we'll describe the problem and then we'll provide safe ministry principles you can practice at your church.
We're going to review 3 essential strategies summed up with the acronym ACT. ACT stands for awareness, communication, and taking action. Volunteers should act to keep kids safe from sexual abuse. First, let's talk about awareness. We need to understand what sexual abuse is. Legal definitions vary from state to state, but in general, child sexual abuse involves any activity in which a minor is used for the sexual stimulation of a perpetrator. The perpetrator may be an adult, a teenager, or another child. Child sexual abuse is criminal behavior. It can involve both touching and non-touching behaviors, fondling, intercourse, rape, and child pornography are obvious forms of sexual abuse. Other less obvious examples include having inappropriate conversations, showing a child pornography, obscene phone calls, indecent exposure or flashing, and allowing children to view sexual activity.
Ministry leaders must be alert to the symptoms of child sexual abuse. These warning symptoms may be physical, behavioral, or expressed by the words of children. Physical symptoms may be bruises or scrapes, irritation or injury to the genital area, discomfort when sitting, and torn or bloody underclothing. Behavioral symptoms may include anxiety about church or certain activities or individuals, nervous or hostile behavior to adults or older children or youth, or acting out sexual behavior. It can also include knowing more about sexual topics than is appropriate for the age of the child. Listen carefully for troubling comments from kids, such as,
"I don't like her. He does things to me when we're alone. I don't want to be alone with her. He's fooling around with me. He's scary."
There are other important awareness issues outlined in the article about child safety included in this online training program. Please take a close look at that article after watching this video.
You know, Dave, all of this is so hard to hear.
I know, Chris, it's hard to talk about, but remember what we were saying about having courage?
Okay, let's continue. You said C is for communication.
Yes, church volunteers should always report questionable behavior by another volunteer or child to their ministry leader. If something doesn't seem right, talk it over with your leader. Every state has what are called mandatory reporting laws. These are rules requiring people in certain occupations to report evidence of child abuse to law enforcement or social services. Check with your leader to understand how mandatory reporting works in your church and your state. A volunteer should always be sensitive to any potential safety problems and communicate issues to their leader. Only after a safety problem is identified can volunteers and staff communicate to resolve it.
You'd want to report anything that looked unsafe, or let your ministry leader know if you had any concerns about actual abuse. We've talked about awareness and communication. Now let's talk about taking action.
That's right, Chris. The T in ACT is taking action. So let's focus now on smart actions that will help safeguard children. Ministry workers can use several proven practices that work to reduce the chances of abuse. Whenever possible, church workers should work in teams of 2 or more. The 2-adult procedure ensures that a worker is never isolated with a child, and it puts both workers above suspicion if a question comes up.
Plus, I found that 2 volunteers working together enjoy the experience so much more. It's less stressful and it's easier to give kids more attention when you don't feel all alone. So Dave, do you recommend allowing teens to help?
Sure, teens are great volunteers when they're supervised.
What about situations where one volunteer has to leave early, or when one child needs to leave the room to go to the restroom? How do we follow the 2-adult procedure then?
I don't know of perfect solutions for those times. Some churches assign an extra volunteer during each service who's available just for these purposes. Other churches recruit specifically for potty patrol and have a flag you can raise outside your door when you need help. The idea that one volunteer may have to be alone with children temporarily reminds me of the next proven procedure, open door ministry. Just like it sounds, this rule means that whenever possible, isolation is avoided. Open doors, perhaps with baby gates if needed. Windows between rooms, plenty of visibility. Sensitive activities, like diaper changing, for example, should be done in view of other adults.
Since you mentioned diapering, what about children who are old enough to use the potty by themselves? What are the best ways to handle restroom procedures for them?
Again, there's no one perfect way to handle this issue, but here are a few ideas. Children 5 years old and younger should use a classroom bathroom if available. If a classroom bathroom is not available, an adult should escort a group of children to a hallway bathroom. When the group arrives at the bathroom, check to make sure the room is empty to ensure no other adults or teens are already in the restroom. Then allow the children to go inside. The worker should remain outside of the bathroom and escort all the children back to the classroom when everyone is finished. If a child is taking longer than seems necessary, the worker should open the bathroom door and call the child's name. If the child requires assistance, the worker should prop open the bathroom door and leave the stall door open as he or she assists the child. A worker should never take a child to the bathroom alone. For children above the age of 5, at least one, and preferably 2, adult males should take the boys to the restroom, and at least one female, or preferably 2, should take the girls. The volunteers should check the bathroom first to make sure that it is empty, then allow the children inside. The volunteers should then remain outside the bathroom door and escort the children back to the classroom. To protect everyone, a volunteer should never be alone with a child in a bathroom with the door closed, and never in a closed bathroom stall with a child. Parents should be encouraged to have their children visit the bathroom prior to each class. The volunteer should stand outside the restroom to make sure that no other children or adults enter the bathroom. Avoid letting unsupervised children leave a classroom to go down the hall to use a bathroom.
How can churches safely check young children into and out of classes? Do you have any recommendations?
Church check-in and check-out procedures are a great safety measure for small children. If your church doesn't have clearly defined procedures for check-in, ask your leader to get a simple system started. It's vital that young children are released only to parents or guardians who bring them in the first place, or other adults only with written permission. There are lots of ways your church can do this, from something as simple as a sign-in and sign-out sheet to more sophisticated systems such as pagers or pre-printed identification cards. Whatever system you use, you want to make sure that only authorized adults can remove a child and that no unauthorized person can simply walk away with a child under your care.
So, we've addressed safety in church situations. What about driving children to and from activities? In my experience, transportation causes a lot of headaches.
Volunteers should drive kids only when it's planned in advance. Parents should be notified and have signed permission forms. You can find sample permission forms on the Safe Church website. Ideally, it's best to follow the 2-adult procedure here too, using a driver and an assistant. If that's not possible, make sure that the driver is never alone with one child. Have the driver bring along her own children, or require that they pick up or drop off the children in a group. Vehicles provide isolation, and as we've said, isolation can enable a child molester. Familiarize yourself with your church's transportation policies. You can find a sample church transportation policy on the Safe Church website.
So Dave, we've talked about several proven ideas so far, using 2 adults, nursery and diaper procedures, restrooms, and transportation policies. What else should volunteers know about?
Some activities hold more risk than others. For example, off-site activities and overnight events can pose more risk. Here are a few principles to follow.
First, consider adding extra adults. A simple way I've found to add extra adults is to make it a family ministry event that includes parents and children in the activity.
Another principle is to try to change the location. Any place that provides opportunities for isolation of one adult and a child is risky. Some riskier locations include a church member's home or outdoors. I'm not saying churches should never plan programs that are away from church grounds, but when you do, build in extra adult supervision. Here are a few principles to consider for overnight events. Extra supervision is required, so invite parents and other safe adults to help chaperone. If both boys and girls will be attending, you'll need both male and female chaperones and separate sleeping quarters for each gender. Boys and girls should have separate shower and restroom facilities. Beds should not be shared between any adult and a minor except among family members. And caution needs to be taken about allowing minors, even of the same gender, to share beds. Finally, be careful about mixing age groups for overnights because older children can be a risk to younger ones.
I've heard that audio-visual rooms in churches are problem areas too. Why is that?
These rooms can be hazardous because they provide darkness and seclusion, and they're hard to observe. Establish a minimum age for children to volunteer in the sound room and follow the 2-adult rule there.
So any situation that provides extra challenges for supervision or opportunities for children to be isolated poses a bigger risk. Dave, you've said any activity that mixes children of different ages has the potential for older children or youth to take advantage of little ones. That's really hard for me to think about.
I know it is. But Guide One Insurance has seen that in 1 of 5 cases of church sexual abuse, the offender is another minor. For example, a 12-year-old boy undressed a 6-year-old girl inside a log playhouse on the church playground and touched her inappropriately. This doesn't mean we can't mix age groups, just that we need to think ahead and supervise children carefully.
This almost makes me feel like nothing is safe, and I can see how it might make people afraid to even hug kids.
I don't think we need to be afraid to hug or comfort kids. Here are a few common sense principles. Any touching, such as hugging, should be age appropriate and based upon the need of the child, not the worker. For example, an adult volunteer holding a 2-year-old who has skinned her knee to provide comfort would be appropriate. But the same volunteer hugging a 12-year-old member of the opposite sex may not. Touching should never take place in isolated settings, such as closed offices, classrooms, or one-on-one situations. Touching should never take place on personal parts of the body, such as private areas, except when following the church's diapering procedures. Consider the bathing suit guideline. Don't ever touch a part of a child's body that would be covered by a bathing suit. Workers should always avoid even the appearance of impropriety. By establishing appropriate boundaries and avoiding situations that could be misinterpreted by onlookers, church workers can help to avoid allegations of abuse or inappropriate conduct. Let the child initiate the physical contact, not the adult. Here are some practical ways to give safe hugs at church. Adults can lean over to give an A hug. That means just the shoulders and the necks of the huggers make contact. Another good hug is standing side by side and reaching around to squeeze a shoulder. Or you could substitute a high five or a handshake for a hug.
So, if you're working in the nursery and a toddler is upset and tugging at your pants leg,
don't hesitate for a second. Of course you can pick him up or rock him in your lap in a rocking chair. You're doing this in full view, out in the open, and another volunteer is in the room with you. The child is initiating the contact. Children need comforting touches. It's fine.
Okay, what about touching a child for discipline purposes?
As a volunteer, I would never spank a child or use physical punishment, even if a parent has told you it's okay. Ask a ministry leader to help if a child is so out of control that you can't handle her with timeouts. Or you can ask the child's parent to step in and help. Check with your church to see if they have a touching and a discipline policy. The Safe Church website has a sample children's ministry handbook that covers these topics if your church doesn't have one. So in review, Chris, we covered awareness, communication, and taking action.
And the courage to tackle an ugly problem.
We can all have courage when we remember we're called to love and care for children just as Jesus does.
Thanks for investing your time in this training to protect the children in your ministry. God bless you as you serve.